Welcome to our AGU webinar, High Impact Publishing and AGU Journals. Excited to have everyone joining here today to hear from two of our editors-in-chief, Dr. Alberto Montanari, editor-in-chief of AGU Advances, and Dr. Kris Karnauskas, editor-in-chief of Geophysical Research Letters. I'm Christina Vrauenvelder. I'm Assistant Director of Publications here at AGU. And before I hand it over to Alberto, I'm going to give a few words just about who AGU is and what we do. AGU, the American Geophysical Union, is a not-for-profit scientific society. We are run by scientists, governed by scientists through our board of directors and our council. And beyond our publications, which you've all joined to learn about today, we also have 60,000 members across the globe. And we host an annual meeting of over 25,000 researchers where people come to share the results of their science, make connections, and conduct global research. On the publication side, we publish 24 peer-reviewed journals, 12 of which are open access, and the rest have open access options, so you can publish OA in any of our journals. We have over 800 editors and associate editors, all experts in their field. And we publish over 7,000 articles per year in AGU journals. Together for our journals, we also host a books program. The books program also has open access options. And we host a preprint and community server called ESS Open Archive. All of our AGU journals, books, and other programs are overseen by our AGU Publications Committee, again, that's staffed by volunteers who are members of our AGU community. So we truly are a community-governed organization. If you'd like to learn more about AGU, or if you'd like to get more involved for our journals as a reviewer, I encourage you to visit our website to see more about our portfolio and to follow this QR link to our reviewer interest form and sign up so that we know that you are interested in reviewing for our journals. Before I hand this over to Alberto, I'm going to give a little bit about our portfolio of 24 journals. Today, you'll be hearing from Geophysical Research Letters and AGU Advances. At the top of our portfolio are high-impact, multidisciplinary journals. AGU Advances publishes a small number of articles per year, approximately 100 articles per year. And these are these are full-length articles. GRL, on the other hand, publishes thousands of articles per year, all letters length, all publishing very quickly. Beside those journals, we have 21 disciplinary journals, including the Journal of Geophysical Research series, and Earth's Future, Water Resources Research, GeoHealth, and other disciplinary journals. And then finally, we publish Earth and Space Science, a multidisciplinary journal publishing high-quality research and data papers. In the meantime, I'm going to move on and introduce Dr. Alberto Montanari, the editor-in-chief of AGU Advances. So Alberto is going to give an introduction to AGU Advances, what kinds of articles we publish, and share some tips to help you get published in AGU Advances. Over to you, Alberto.
Thank you very much, Christina, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's really a great pleasure for me to see how many people are joining this webinar, and it's a pleasure for me to give a brief introduction to AGU Advances and to give you some suggestions in order to better understand what kind of contributions we are expecting. Next slide, Christina, please. So first of all, AGU Advances is relatively new. It's only 5 years old. And the aim is to publish high-impact research and commentaries across the whole spectrum of Earth and space sciences. So we get contributions from all fields of Earth and space sciences. And important thing to be kept in mind, we look for contributions that have broad and immediate implications, and the contributions that are of interest not only to researchers in the respective fields, but also to the larger science community and to the public at large. So basically, there are two, I believe, useful suggestions that I may give if you want to assess if your contribution should be submitted to advances. So the first is that we look for really high-profile contributions with immediate implications. And in fact, you will see that any of the papers published in advances is spotlighted. And the second suggestion is the broad interest, not only for scientists, but also for the public. We offer a constructive peer review by expert scientists who volunteer their time and insight also to provide a constructive suggestion. So while we aim to publish a relatively small number of papers, about 100 per year, on the other hand, we are really committed to provide useful suggestions to improve the papers that are eventually not published. And also to make sure that lack of funding does not become a barrier to publishing, AGU offers funding support for the authors, including full waivers. So don't be concerned by the publication charges. Actually, Advances is a fully open access journal. So any contribution that is published there is open to the public. It can be seen for free and can be shared. You see on the slide the journal metrics. Keep into account that the journal is relatively young. On the other hand, we know that these metrics are not so important. What is really important is the service that the journal offers to the authors in terms of visibility that is given to the contribution and in terms of constructive feedback that the journal can provide. You see also the statistics related to timeliness of publication. We have a relatively short time for providing the first decision, and but actually it's the timing to the first decision is now going to improve. It's already improving because we are making also an effort to provide a quick feedback. Next slide, Christina, thanks. Here you can see a couple of links to meet our editorial board. And in particular, we have 23 editors in Advances. They are highly respected scientists. And, you know, the number is large because they are covering all the fields of Earth and space sciences. We don't have associate editors. So the papers are directly dealt with by the editors who handle the review process in person, select the reviewers and directly in order for the sake of timeliness. We have the article types that are also allowed by the whole spectrum of AGU journals, in particular research articles with no limitation of length. Actually, I should say that the editorial board is discussing the opportunity of introducing or not a length limitation because given that we don't have any limitation, we sometimes get very long papers and therefore for the sake of providing a lot of visibility, a good visibility to this contribution, we are considering the opportunity of introducing a length limitation, but it would be not very strict anyway. We also publish viewpoints because we give, in some cases, to the reviewers of the papers the opportunity of publishing a viewpoint on the paper itself. It's a way to give more visibility. We also accept commentaries on published papers and commentaries in general, perspective papers, and we also publish a number of editorials. Next slide, please, Christina. I want to say a bit more on how we evaluate papers in Advances. First of all, take into account that we receive currently about 400 submissions per year. The number is increasing, and we aim to publish about 100 papers per year. And usually we get papers that are already of quite good quality. We are very happy with the quality of the papers we receive, and all the papers are first evaluated within a few days holistically by a group of selected editors who discuss among them and decide whether the paper is worth sending out for review. And this is a press screening that for about more than half of the paper, it is concluded by suggesting to address the paper to another journal or encouraging a resubmission if it is rejected on the basis of a constructive criticism. And of course, some papers are rejected outright. And then if the paper is sent out for review, it is also assigned to an editor who oversees the review process by selecting reviewers and, of course, discussing with the reviewers about the quality of the paper. The peer reviews, once the paper is accepted, are published transparently along all accepted articles. And we also we offer the opportunity of cross review, which means that before publication, and before returning the reviews to the authors, it is given to the reviewers the opportunity to see the reviews of the other referees and eventually to modify their review basing on what is the opinion of the other reviewers. This is a way to make sure that the evaluation is consistent with an agreed opinion by the reviewers and the editor. Also, we focus on science advocacy. I'm very pleased to say this because we are really motivated to provide support to scientists with a broad perspective. And so you can see an example on the slide. We have now a special collection, by the way, on equality, diversity, and inclusivity. Because we feel that it's now time also to discuss these issues. And one important thing to be said is that anyway, any of the published paper is highlighted by the editor or spotlighted by a science writer. This is because we aim to give the max of the visibility to each published contribution. The next one, Christina. So you can read some examples, and here you have the link to selected papers. And as I said, we aim to spotlight or highlight any of the contribution we received. This means that a summary is published in EOS, which is a magazine that is read by a large part of our community, as you know. And indeed, our experience is that we are pretty successful in getting visibility also on the press because we also cover the press with our communications. We also publish a digest, and the subscribers are about today 17,000. And it's a bi-monthly digest featuring the research that we publish in advances. We are also on the social media and in Blue Sky and in X. And also, if you want more information, you see also the email that you may use to get further information. The next one, I think. I am done, and of course, I am open to your question. Remember that the chat is open for your questions. Thank you, and over back to you, Christina.
Thanks, Alberto. We're going to run another poll, and if you have questions for Alberto, put them in the Q&A. We'll have a Q&A section at the end of this webinar. We're going to launch our second poll here, which is how do you promote your own research? Do you share it on LinkedIn or a similar platform? Do you use Twitter, Blue Sky? Do you share pictures and captions on Instagram? Do you maintain your own website? Or is there something else that we haven't thought of that you use to promote your own research? If you have an other, you can just select that other button. All right, we've got 40% of people responding. Okay, you guys have a lot of opinions so far. I'm seeing a lot of LinkedIn's. LinkedIn is the new way to share your research. Not as many on Twitter or Blue Sky. And a lot of you have your own website. A few people are using Instagram. That's super fun. If you have pretty pictures coming out of your research, I feel like Instagram is a great place for that. Maybe not so much for graphs. All right, a few more people answering here, and then we'll end the poll. It's great to see this. This helps, this kind of information from you helps us know how to promote your research when you publish it with AGU publications. Should we be promoting it on LinkedIn? It looks like the answer to that is definitely yes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Share the results of everyone here so you can see what everyone answered. 55% of you said LinkedIn or a similar platform is where you prefer to share and promote your own research. 17% on Twitter, only 8% on Instagram, but I still think 8% is maybe higher than I expected. And then a lot of you have your own website, which makes sense. All right. So thanks, Alberto, again. If you have more questions about advances, you can always contact us at advances@agu.org. And we're now going to hand it over to Kris, Dr. Kris Karnauskas of Geophysical Research Letters, the editor-in-chief, who will talk about that journal. Over to you, Kris.
Thanks, Christina, and thanks, Alberto, for covering AGU advances so well and your leadership there. Turns out there's a lot of overlap in terms of themes actually between these two journals, but there's also a lot of important ways that they're distinct within AGU's portfolio of journals. So I will try to skip through things that were covered by Alberto and get us to the live Q&A session as quickly as possible. So go to the next slide, please, Christina. So this is a similar slide as the one that Alberto showed, but for GRL. One of the, I think Christina mentioned this, one of the most obvious ways that GRL and AGU advances are different is the sheer volume of submissions and number of papers that we publish. GRL receives over 5,000 submissions per year. And that's something like 25% of all of the submissions to any AGU across all of the AGU journals. So we have a massive load of papers to process at GRL. Here's the very similar to advances, we offer constructive peer review by scientists who volunteer their time. We maintain the highest quality standards and promote best practices. And if you didn't know about the APC waiver program, please take a close look at that and take advantage of it if you are unable to find funds to cover your page charges. Our metrics are shown down there. They are what they are. One of the things that we really strive to do at GRL, just like AGU advances, is a relatively quick turnaround time. Our median time to first decision is 32 days. That's pretty good. Reviewers are really busy these days, as you know, probably a huge fraction of the people in the participants of this webinar are or have been reviewers for journals like GRL or AGU Advances, and so you know what it's like to try to fit this into your schedule. But this is one of the things that we really keep an eye on. We have a acceptance rate. I don't think it's listed here. We have an acceptance rate right now of 36%, and so just to give a bit of context to that, I think advances when I checked this morning is 20%. And one of the things that I personally like about society journals like AGU, AGU's journals is that if you have a good paper, and you submit it, it's going to get a fair shake with us. Contrast the acceptance rates with science, which is 6%, and nature, which is 8%. And the JGR family of journals, they average 48% across those journals. So once again, if you have a good paper, and I'll give some pieces of advice in a minute, but how to submit a good paper to GRL, it's going to get a fair shot with us. Okay, go to the next slide, please, Christina. Hold on. That's important. Go back. That little thing that appeared 50 years. That's another somewhat different thing between GRL and AGU Advances. AGU Advances is off to a roaring start. But GRL has actually been around for just over 50 years now. I didn't realize that until I became the editor-in-chief, but it's really something that this journal has been sort of a beacon of AGU's best science for a half of a century. All right, next, please. So our editorial board, I double checked the numbers just this morning. We have 32 editors, and actually we have 32 associate editors. And so we have, that's how we process over 5,000 submissions per year. The editors and associate editors, just like AGU Advances and all the other AGU journals, were volunteer. This is a service activity for us, and I think all of us are here because we enjoy it and we think that it's a great way to make an impact on the community. So, just like AGU Advances, GRL does cover all of the disciplines that are under the AGU umbrella. All of the sort of JGR journals that have its own discipline, like JGR Oceans, JGR Solid Earth. We cover all of those, but we cover them in a very short format, 12 publication units. So a publication unit is 500 words or a figure or table. So if you've tried to write one, it adds up really quickly. We also publish commentaries and editorials. Next, please. So yeah, I think this probably applies to any journal, honestly, especially GRL and AGU Advances. But my suggestion is to target the scope and audience, double check the scope of the journal, what we cover. A lot of them, what I wrote, they're easier to go from GRL to JGR, fill in the blank. I wrote that because, I've been there just like many of you have, that it's actually pretty tough to take a full format paper and successfully disguise it as a GRL article. Reviewers can tell that you're trying to bury the whole story in, 15 supplemental figures and tables and supplemental text. If it doesn't read like a cohesive story within the main text of GRL, it's a sign that it probably will be better served by a full format publication in a disciplinary journal. And that is never a a negative comment about your work. It just different pieces of work are better served in different formats. So that's something that reviewers pick up on very frequently and leads to rejection. Try to tell a compelling story. In GRL, since we cover all of the disciplines that AGU embraces, kind of think of it as you're writing a paper and you're almost like speaking on behalf of your discipline. Don't just write to your disciplinary, friends in your niche, but you're writing to people in different disciplines. So you're sort of having to make sure you're writing generally enough and without too much jargon. I mean, I know it's unavoidable even in GRL, but try to write a little bit like you're speaking on behalf of your discipline to the broader AGU community. And as always, try to anticipate and preempt reviewer criticisms. And one way to do that is to think like a reviewer. And somebody asked in the chat a little bit ago, which I answered with a link to the reviewer form. If you haven't reviewed for GRL before or any AGU journal, there's a form in that QR code right there that when you submit that, it gets collated with on like a monthly basis, and then it gets sent out to all the editors in chief to make suggestions to our editorial board on new reviewers who are looking to get involved in the process. That's a good way to become a better author, in my opinion, is to see it from the other side. Next, please. Okay, and so as with all the other journals, we do participate in open special collections, and I just want to point out that special collections are usually they have a lead journal and then they have a bunch of, perhaps 1 to three participating journals that are all part of a special collection. GRL is rarely the primary journal, and this is just because special collections usually bubble up from a community within a discipline or maybe a small interdisciplinary space. And, you know, they're usually led by your more traditional discipline-focused journals like JGR Oceans, for example. And then GRL can be a participating journal in most of these cases, where if there really is a briefer, higher impact, cohesive story that can be told in 12 publication units, GRL will absolutely be happy to consider that. We write plenty of research highlights as well. It's a benefit of publishing with any AGU journal, and we encourage our editors at GRL to write these highlights, which really help to get the word about your new paper out as broadly as possible. Next, please. I think that might be it. Back to you, Christina.
Thanks, Kris. And again, I want to repeat that if you have questions for Kris and Alberto, you can keep putting them in the Q&A, and we will have them speaking at the end of this section. Before we move to the next thing, before we start our Q&A, I want to know from you all, why is publishing in an interdisciplinary journal like AGU Advances or GRL important to you? What does it mean for your research? And you can feel free to put your short answer in here so that we know for next time. You can feel free to sort of just save that up for your Q&A with Kris and Alberto. All this information we use to make our journals better as well. Alberto and Kris are always thinking, how can we better promote the research that's published in AGU Advances and GRL? It's so important to make sure that your research reaches the right audience. And start thinking of your questions for Alberto and Kris and putting those in the Q&A as well. I know some reasons why we've heard from people before that publishing in an interdisciplinary journal is valuable to them is getting a wider audience for their research, making sure that, you know, if you're working in hydrology, maybe your work is interdisciplinary and you want to make sure that other people who are interested in your results might be able to see your paper and understand it. Of course, publishing an interdisciplinary journal, we really heavily mine our interdisciplinary journals for press releases and for sending research to the press to make sure that that research that has a broad public impact. Seeing some answers like that coming in from you as well. All right, get your answers in. I'm going to end it in just a second, and then we're going to move to the Q&A section of this panel. And Kris and Alberto will be answering all of your questions, or at least all of the ones that they have answers to. Some things aren't answerable. All right, quite a few of you have shared a little bit about why publishing in an interdisciplinary journal is valuable to you, so thanks for that. Share the results briefly. And now let's go ahead and move to our Q&A section. One last time, that email for GRL, you can also find it on our website. And now I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to highlight Kris and Alberto. Put your questions in the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer them. It doesn't have to be just about AGU Advances and GRL. It can be about publishing, it can be about reviewing more generally, about writing your first paper.
We already started replying to some question, but if you want additional information on the same question, please write in the box.
Yeah, I second that. I had answered a couple things thinking it was just one little thing to say, but it filed it away and answered, and I didn't mean for that to happen. So please bring your question back up if it wasn't answered fully.
And I think some things we might also return to. Maybe we can get Kris and Alberto, we can get both of your takes on I see a question first that was upvoted regarding our commitment to federal science. What is AGU doing? What are our journals doing to publish research papers and data sets that would otherwise have been published by a federal agency? And I know you two might have different perspectives on this because Alberto, you are based in Italy. Kris, you're based in the US, right? Do you have any plans for GRL or advances in particular, or AGU efforts in general that you'd like to highlight?
I'm not really expert on this, as you pointed out, so I would prefer to defer to Kris and then maybe follow up if.
Yeah, the one thing that came to mind right away when that great question was asked was our announcement earlier this month, where we are joining with the American Meteorological Society to form a special collection that will, keep the momentum going on the U.S. National Climate Assessment. So that's one example. Essentially, the NCA authors were I don't know how to put it, told not to do that, not to publish that anymore, and we're going to go ahead and publish it anyway. We're not a governmental organization, so we are an independent publisher with journals, and we're free to publish any papers that we see fit. So we see that to be fit. I would imagine there could be more examples of this, but I think we're um, still trying to assess the landscape and how AGU and publications can contribute. One thing that I know is on a lot of people's minds is the preservation of climate, of just data in general, but in particular climate data in our case. Um, not just products being discontinued, but potentially products being removed from government servers. And I'm not involved in those discussions, but I think they're being had. I'll just put a plug there on that. That's what I know about right now.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
great,
indeed.
Chris. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead,
indeed.
Alberto.
Yeah, indeed, the special collection now is in particular focusing one of them on climate research, precisely to give the opportunity to publish the latest research on climate in a critical time, to give the opportunity to publish it in AGU journals. And I may take the opportunity to answer some of the questions which are in the box, and in particular, how the editors select which paper to be highlighted. In advances, any published paper, as I said, is spotlighted over EOS with a text that is written by the editor and editorial staff. In advances, we may also decide to give additional visibility to selected contributions, and we make our selection basing on the opinion of the editors and the reviewers. And if the reviewers and the editor believe that the paper is really introducing a substantial advance, something that is really very interesting also for the public at large, then we also cover with the additional initiatives, the press and any other channel to improve visibility. I give, before giving the word to Kris, to what extent does the abstract and the introduction of a paper influence the acceptance or rejection? I would say that it is extremely important that the abstract and the introduction are well written. I also think it is important the cover letter. I see that many authors, basically, they don't write, they choose not to write any cover letter. I believe in my editorial activity, when I get a cover letter, I always read it because usually it contains an additional information on the motivation of the authors. The authors are, of course, convinced that their contribution is very interesting. Otherwise, they wouldn't submit to a journal like GRL or Advances. And in the cover letter, if you can explain your motivation and why you think the contribution is really deserving attention by our journal, this is useful. Of course, then we look at the whole paper. We don't stop our evaluation to the abstract and the introduction, but anyway, it is the first thing that we read: cover letter, abstract, and then introduction and the remaining part of the paper. The word to you, Kris.
That's super helpful, Alberto. So Kris, there are two questions there that Alberto answered. How is research chosen to be highlighted in GRL? And then, of course, what part does the abstract, does the cover letter, et cetera, play in the evaluation of a paper?
Yep, and just before Alberto addressed the question about the abstract and introduction, I actually typed an answer because I didn't know if we were going to get to that. what I said was actually very similar to what Alberto said verbally. I said that it's very important. You know, at GRL and AGU Advances, we we decline to send a high, you know, there's a lot of great papers that are submitted that we don't send out for peer review. And I would say it's, you know, the abstract and the introduction and the cover letter, those are crucial to be written well and explaining why this fits the aims and scope of the journal, including why it's, you know, going to be of broader interest to the AGU community than just your colleagues in your discipline. So I fully support what Alberto said. The other question about how, I think it was about how papers are selected for highlights, research highlights. I think that well, the on the back end, on the technical side of things, there's a way to sort of that we flag them as soon as we are processing them and triaging them to editors, where we can get a sense that this one might be, you know, really impactful and or deserve a boost, and we sort of flag it early on. But also editor or reviewers are very helpful in this. You know, review. There's nobody who reads a paper more carefully than a peer reviewer. And they are the representatives of that discipline saying, hey, this I'm in this discipline, but look, this one really is a big deal. And it's going to be a really big deal for my discipline, and it's going to, you know, change something in the broader scheme of things. So we encourage the reviewers also to help us identify those. I think there's actually a drop down menu or a checkbox or something right there where you submit your review that says, you know, this is consider this paper for extra promotion, be it social media or a research highlight, and even write a sentence or two about why this is, you know, justifying that that suggestion, which is independent of the decision of whether to accept or reject or give major or minor revisions, but it's unlikely that someone's recommending we reject a paper, but also saying this one's a game changer. So we do, you know, the reviewers help us out a lot with that.
That's great. Being a reviewer is so important. I'm going to ask you both another question from the chat from Efren. How do you promote inclusion and diversity from scientists from the global south, so non-English, the questioner is specifying, in these journals?
I can start by saying, first of all, that I am much motivated to provide support to the Global South. And actually, the criteria that we use for evaluating the profile of the contribution are the same. So we don't make exception to the assessment criteria for papers. What we do is, because we recognize the difficulties in getting used for a non-English speaker to writing high-profile papers, what we do usually is when we see that the paper is going to be is not acceptable in the present form, we make an effort to provide a constructive suggestion, constructive review, to give advice on how to improve the presentation or the content of the research. So we cannot make any exceptions on the criteria for our assessment, but we try to be more constructive. What I would suggest, if you experience any difficulty in, and you are convinced that your research is valuable, I suggest to consider the mentoring programs of AGU, because indeed it may be very useful to get some continued assistance from an expert scientist. Unfortunately, we as editors cannot provide continued support to improve your papers because, of course, our time is limited. But I believe it is indeed extremely important. So if you really want to get a support, look for a mentoring program. What I would like to say is, please don't get discouraged. So you have the max of support from our side, and keep making efforts because you can do it. I'm really convinced of that, and we have several examples of success.
That's a great encouragement, Alberto. Kris, do you have anything to add to that?
That was a wonderful outline of the many ways that all of the AGU journals try to do this. In GRL's case, I don't know what the statistics are at AGU Advances, but in GRL's case, and I wrote about this in an EOS piece recently, our submissions from Latin America and Africa are extremely low, and that's something that I really, I became the editor-in-chief of GRL about 5 months ago, and that's one of the goals that I wrote about, part of our strategic plan for the next few years. So I do plan to work on that. Part of it is the representation on the editorial board. That's really important to have that representation from around the world, including parts of the regions where we want to increase submissions from and successful submissions. Alberto mentioned mentoring. I believe there's what do we call it, Christina, at the meetings? There's I forgot what it's called, but it's where you can sit down with an editor for 15 minutes and talk about your paper. And I've participated, but I forgot what we call that.
Editor rapid reviews.
Okay.
So Kris is exactly right. Look out for this at AGU and AGU meetings in particular.
And that said, these are not cheap meetings or easy meetings to get to. So being mindful of that, I would echo what Alberto said, which is to reach out to us. There is some, without helping to produce the paper, we may be able to provide some mentoring, remotely over Zoom or email to help out in that way, if in the similar way as like an editor rapid review, if you're not able to make the meeting. But I think to do that, reach out to me as editor-in-chief, and I would help to put you in touch with either do it myself or help find the most suitable editor on our board to help with that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kris, about meeting attendance and having that be a barrier to access to talk to editors. I want to say also, in addition to the resources that Alberto and Kris have pointed out, that AGU periodically runs mentoring circles and classes and webinars on how to review and how to publish. So definitely look out for future options for that from us. In 2026, we're planning to run a pretty extensive several-month-long course on publishing, how to write a paper that will involve editor feedback as well. But there's lots of opportunities that we try to offer both virtually and in person. Okay, I'm moving on to the next highest upvoted question, which is from Udo. It says, it is difficult to determine whether we should submit to AGU Advances or to a more standard JGR journal. Give us some criteria beyond the scope of the journal for choosing between, I think, JGR, GRL, Advances, and so on.
I think I may add something to what I already said. So what I already said is basically for Advances, look at for an interest not only to scientists, but the public at large. And I think it may be useful if I add something. Frequently, we suggest transfers to JGR or GRL for papers that are extremely technical. So when we say that the contribution should be interesting for the public at large, we also mean that the way the contribution is presented should be accessible. If it is a very technical issue, maybe very interesting, high profile, but very technical, then usually we suggest a transfer. And this is what I can say. And eventually, what I can tell you is that when we get papers submitted to Advances, which we believe don't fit the scope of the journal, usually we send a reply to the authors by 1 week at the latest. Very frequently is a few days, like 4 days, 5 days. So it is very quick to make a check. And if you are in doubt, it may be worth trying. I take this opportunity because I saw a question that is, I think it is relevant. And the question was about previous rejections. So if you get a paper that was previously rejected by like Science, Nature, the question is, should I submit the reviews that I got back from them? If it is, I don't think we have a rule for that. So I can tell you what I do usually, because I often get rejected by Nature and Science. Usually, yes, if I get rejected after review, and I submit to another journal, I also submit the reviews that I got back, because I think it is useful. It helps saving reviewers' time. You provide useful information to the editor. When I receive this previous rejection, I carefully evaluate them. I think it is useful, and it's also useful for your time. But of course, I don't think we have a rule for that.
It's really interesting to hear that perspective, Alberto. I was intrigued by that question. Of course, that's up to the author. I've been I've never been rejected by Nature or Science, of course. No. When that happens, I feel I think it's just a personal choice in a it's let's be honest, it's just strategic move. Some people will take their manuscript that was rejected and they'll go through every potential indicator that this was previously submitted. Like, do you write figure or fig? Do you use uppercase or lowercase panel labels? Like every little thing you could change to hide the fact that you submitted it. We know this, we're all scientists too, and we know that this happens, and we're not at all ashamed that we get submissions that were previously rejected by Science or Nature. Science and Nature versus AGU Advances and GRL, these are completely different journals, not just editorially, but when we desk reject papers, it's not because we don't think it's going to be on the cover of the New York Times. That's not why we're desk rejecting papers. We're strictly doing it because it doesn't meet the aims and scope. So to the original question about giving additional criteria, we don't have additional criteria. Our criteria are clearly laid out, and if you meet that, we will give it a fair shake and send it out for peer review. That's my stance on that. Um, that said, we make mistakes. Editors, we do make mistakes, and so if we desk reject a paper, we're not offended if we get a message back from the authors. Um, you know, Probably don't do it within the hour, because then we know you're just mad. But like if you write a thoughtful response about why, we might have missed the point of how this is of broad, this meets the aims and scope, or it's more broad than just a standard disciplinary paper. We have changed our minds. I've done it. We make mistakes, and so, we're not perfect. So like I said, we're not looking for papers that are going to be on the, headlines. Most of them aren't. Most of them are just great papers by our community. And so for GRL, I would go back to the key distinction between GRL and every other journal in the AGU family, which is the length limit. It's very short, 12 publication units. That's, one PU, one publication unit is 500 words or a figure or table. So if you have a paper, even if it is kind of disciplinary, if it's really exciting to you and you can write and you can convey that story in a short format, I'd give it a shot. I certainly have. So we don't have other criteria, but that's gives a little perspective, I guess.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, I think it's always a balance. So two next questions are sort of along the same lines. The first one says, I think you both have already addressed this to some extent. If you've been rejected by another journal, maybe Nature, maybe Science, or another journal, should those reviews be shared upon resubmission to GRL or Advances, or would it be better to sort of skip the reviews and have your manuscript evaluated independently? And then secondly, I think this is related. When you submit a manuscript and you get your reviews back and you receive conflicting evaluations from reviewers, so as an editor and you see those conflicting evaluations, what is your editorial decision-making process that you use to resolve the conflicts and reach a final decision on the manuscript?
There's a few ways to address that. We're both Alberto and I are editors in chief of journals that try to render decisions quickly. So this presents a fire that needs to be put out when we get this. It needs to be addressed. And one option is to find a third review. You know, if we had two reviews and they're conflicting, we might try to find a third review. But that's sort of, in my opinion, the last resort, because that's going to add weeks onto the time until you get your decision. So there's a few strategies that I've employed over the years. One is to ask an associate editor for a quick review. If they can sort of contextualize the two reviews and, you know, almost be something of a tiebreaker, that can be really helpful. While we don't really have this formalized yet, or maybe it has been in GEMS for some journals now, but we can do cross review in sort of an informal basis. If I've got two reviews and it's like, wow, are they even reading the same paper? I might ask the two reviewers, and not keeping everything perfectly anonymous. Hey, your review is very different from reviewer two. Would it be okay if I shared your review with them and shared their review with you anonymously, and just think about it again for a minute and see if there was anything that maybe you missed or they missed and you see it differently? I have to say, every time I've done that, it's usually worked out for the authors. It's usually been the reviewer who was very, not supportive of the paper, who's been like, I see this a little bit differently. There was some value to this paper that the other reviewer pointed out that I didn't quite recognize the first time around. And usually that ends up going to, you know, revisions. We can also kind of take into consider everything ourselves and just make a decision as is if it's close enough to our discipline. This can be pretty tough with GRL because we cover everything, but if it's really within the editor's decision, they can make a decision with split reviews. That's no problem.
Okay, I can add a few words. First of all, I am relatively new in advances. I started January 1st, and in my experience so far, it didn't happen frequently. The opinion of the reviewers differed. And the reason may be twofold. First, we editors make a preliminary screening, and we send out only the papers that pass this preliminary screening, which means that there is a pre-selection. And the pre-selection helps in sending to the reviewers only the papers that are reasonably good. In fact, our rejection rate after review is quite low. And the second reason may be that we have indeed a system in place for cross reviews, for crossing the reviews. And it may be that in some of the cases, the editors accepted to modify their review basing on the outcome from the other reviewers. In general, if I got reviews that are contrasting, usually the editor is an expert, so tries to elaborate its own opinion. And if I am in doubt, I consult again with the other editors. And I think that, this makes the decision quite robust. It happened in my past experience as an editor that a paper with a critical review was at the end accepted, because it may happen.
Makes sense. Thank you both. We have a lot of comments in the Q&A, but I'm going to take one more question before we wrap this webinar up, which is, given the growing difficulty in securing reviewers, what happens if a manuscript has not received sufficient peer reviews after an extended period of time?
Yeah, we face this all the time, especially, I don't know if it had anything to do with COVID, but I've been editing for AGU journals for well over a decade, and I feel like there was a real shift somewhere around then, and it just became harder to find peer reviewers. It's probably just been a trend. I don't know if it was a stepwise thing, but um, so the way it works is, as you may know, if you've declined to review a paper yourself, you're asked for suggested alternative reviewers, and actually those end up being wonderful suggestions because they're not made by the author, so we know they're kind of they're a little one more step removed from the authors, but they're usually a great suggestion of another reviewer. So we harvest those suggestions and often send requests out to them. We have a lot of tools to find reviewers. Our whole AGU publishing machine, any author or reviewer who's ever been a part of it is kind of in the database, and we can search that way. But one thing I do is if I can detect that that's the way one of these papers is going, where I've, sent invitations to like 10 reviewers and I have 0 or 1, reviewers signed on at this point, I'll just write back to the authors myself, a friendly email, and say, hey, I'm sorry, this is taking longer than I wanted it to. We're getting a lot of people saying no. It might be a busy time of year. Do you have a few more suggestions? And yeah, usually within like 40 minutes, I've got an email from the authors like, yes, here's, 10 more suggestions. And so that does two things. It sort of establishes a little bit more trust between the editorial board and the author. Like we're just trying to do our job and help shepherd this paper through peer review, but it gives you a chance to give us more suggestions, and that often does speed things along. Alberto?
Yeah, I think I have nothing more to add. The only thing I could say, given that we don't send out so many papers for review, usually I try to exceed with the number of requests, and I can do that because actually as I said, we don't send out so many papers, and then with many requests, of course, there is a larger probability of getting a positive answer or many suggestions. And this is what usually I do. Actually, what I would like to introduce in advance is like a limiting time for getting the first decision to the authors. This is an experience that I did 10 years ago in water resources research, and it may work because after the limiting time, the editors should take over, in my opinion, because indeed it is becoming more and more important to publish quickly, because we live in a modern world and everything is running faster than in the past.
Yeah,
That's very true.
Idea.
That's very true, Alberto. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Kris. I hope everyone will join me in thanking our panelists for making time for this conversation to share their expertise and insight. That's all the questions that we have time for. We will be sharing a follow-up email to this webinar with a full recording. So if there's something that Alberto or Kris said that you want to rehear, you can go back and look at that. And we will include some resources based on the question and answer on reviewing, on publishing, on the aims and scope of AGU advances in GRL. Kris, Alberto, any last words you'd like to share?
Just thank you, everybody out there, for your thoughtful questions. I think this was a really productive exchange. Thanks for being here.
Yes, indeed, very productive. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that we didn't reply to all the questions, but please contact us if you would like some more details or for the questions that have not been answered. Looking forward to getting your papers.
All right, thank you both very much. And thank you to all our participants. I hope you all have a wonderful day.